The 1950s saw the establishment of computers as essential research tools, and their use greatly expanded in the 1960s. In 1955, there were only about 250 computers in the entire world. By 1965, there were over 20,000. Computers were still expensive, costing the modern equivalent of $1 million or more, putting them well outside the reach of consumers. They were strictly the purview of governments, research institutions, universities, and a few private companies. As rare and expensive research tools, their potential for amusement was rarely explored. Strachey, Turing, and others used games primarily as a way to test the programming limits of early computers, while Higginbotham developed his game to liven up otherwise mundane public demonstrations. Developing video games for their own sake was not something many people did. But there were exceptions. While video games as a concept got their start in the 1950s, it was in the 1960s that their potential as amusement devices was truly explored. Two important developments occurred during this decade. One was at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, and the other at a private defense contractor called Sanders Associates. Let's begin with MIT. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology, located just outside of Boston in the town of Cambridge, got its start as Boston Tech in 1865. The university's founder, William Barton Rogers, envisioned it as a place that would balance practical education with academic theory, thus preparing students for the rapidly changing world brought about by the Industrial Revolution. Despite its lofty ambitions, MIT struggled with financial issues, staffing shortages, and low enrollment. At the start of the 20th century, it was generally regarded as little more than a glorified vocational school. That changed with World War II. In an effort to outscience the Germans and Japanese, the United States poured huge sums of money into military research and development. MIT was one of the biggest beneficiaries of this, and rapidly expanded its faculty, staff, and facilities. It shifted focus from undergraduate education to scientific and technical research, and in doing so made great strides in the fields of radar, aerial photography, gyroscopic navigation, and of course, computers. After the war, it continued to be a leader in these and other fields, and as of 2021, MIT has produced 98 Nobel laureates, the fourth most of any institution. By 1961, MIT and nearby Harvard University played host to a number of large, expensive, and cumbersome computers, the kind that took up entire rooms and needed multiple people just to operate. Three men worked as technicians on these devices: Wayne Whitman, J.M. Graetz, and Steve Russell. The three were MIT graduates, and in addition to being roommates at a seedy flophouse they affectionately called the Hingham Institute after the street on which it was located, they worked as assistants at Harvard's computer lab. The lab's pride and joy was its IBM 704 computer, a humongous array of tubes and circuits that Graetz described like this. The operator set switches, pushed buttons, and examined panels of flashing lights while we, his assistants, attended various whirring, clanking, and chattering devices, rushing to and fro with stacks of cryptically printed paper, decks of weirdly punched cards, and reels of recondite brown ribbon, all to the background hum of the machine. When Graetz and his roommates weren't busy at the lab, they enjoyed reading trashy sci-fi novels, such as the space operas of E.E. Smith, and catching the latest kaiju movie in one of Boston's grimier theaters. Put another way, they were nerds, and were even members of MIT's Tech Model Railroad Club, or TMRC. Some joined the club for artistic reasons, taking pleasure in constructing artificial landscapes or modeling scale-accurate reproductions of real-life locomotives. Others were more technically minded, and worked on the wiring and circuitry that made the model trains actually move. That group, the so-called Signals and Power Subcommittee, had their own internal vocabulary, with a whole host of esoteric jargon. Gronk, meaning to cut, sever, or smash something. Tool, meaning to study very hard. And hack, meaning to work at something with no particular endpoint in mind. To do something for fun. A person who engaged in hacking was called a hacker, and Graetz, Russell, and Whitman all consider themselves to be hackers. As well as model trains and railroads, several members of the club enjoyed working with computers as well. Greats, Russell, and Whitman all had access to Harvard's IBM 704, but given that it required several people to even operate, it was not the sort of thing one could simply hack on. MIT, by contrast, had a much more wieldy device, the TX-0. While still bulky by today's standards, it was roughly the size of a large car. It had a CRT monitor for ease of display, as well as an integrated control unit that served as combination switchboard, printer, and tape reader. It could also be operated by one person, instead of an entire team. The hackers took advantage of this, and during the TX-0's tenure at MIT, it was used to create several programs for no other purpose than that they were amusing. Programs like Bouncing Ball, Mouse in the Maze, Hacks, and of course, Tic-Tac-Toe. Yet Greats, Russell, and Whitman felt computers were capable of much, much more. When it was revealed that the TX-0 would soon be replaced with the more advanced and user-friendly PDP-1, the three roommates got to work. Before the new computer even arrived, they began brainstorming ideas for what to do with it. They wanted to make a game far more complicated and engaging than anything that had come before. A game that would require all of the PDP-1's computational power. And this game, they agreed, had to be set in space. Russell, with a little prodding, wrote the code for what would become Spacewar, which is often cited as the first video game with a wide release. Since he wrote the initial code, Russell is usually credited as Spacewar's inventor, but an essential part of the hacker mentality was freedom of information. Members of the TMRC freely shared and modified each other's ideas. Russell's initial version featured two spaceships: the Needle, modeled to look like the Redstone rockets used by the US military, and the Wedge, a more bulbous design based off the spaceships of early sci-fi character Buck Rogers. These two vessels would fly around a randomly generated starfield and fire projectiles at each other, the goal being to destroy the other ship. As with Tennis for Two, it was strictly two-player, and there was no way to keep score. The physics of the game were quite advanced, with the ships maintaining realistic momentum as they navigated through the simulated zero-G environment. The goal was to make the game as realistic as possible, and this strive for accuracy resulted in a number of inputs from other TMRC members. Peter Sampson, disliking the randomly generated starfield, added a code to make it accurately reflect the night sky. J.M. Greats added a star at the center of the screen that served as a gravity well, pulling both ships towards it and adding an element of strategy to what was otherwise a straightforward shooter. Dan Edwards added a hyperspace function that randomly transported the player's ship to another location. At first, the game could only be played by directly operating the PDP-1's control board, and since it was two-player, this led to cramped playing conditions, as well as a painful element called Spacewar Elbow. To combat this, Bob Saunders built a pair of custom controllers, featuring two miniature joysticks. Other ideas, such as improved explosion graphics or having the central star affect projectiles as well, had to be abandoned as there simply wasn't enough memory to accommodate them. Spacewar, just as the roommates had wanted, pushed the PDP-1 to its absolute limits. By the spring of 1962, Spacewar was ready to go, and it made its public debut at the MIT Science Open House in May of that year. Spacewar, like Tennis for Two, was a hit. During the open house, the TMRC established a score limit to keep people from playing too long, as well as a display screen to let spectators watch without having to crowd around the computer's monitor. Tennis for Two was dismantled after its two public appearances, but Spacewar stuck around and became very popular within MIT's computer lab. It was so popular that the lab's administrator had to set limits on how long it could be played, eventually banning it outright during working hours. Keeping with their hacker ethos, Russell and others freely shared Spacewar's code with anyone who wanted it. In 1963, Russell took a job at Stanford University and brought Spacewar with him. Other club members introduced the game to Harvard University and the Department of Defense's Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA. Homegrown versions of the game began popping up not just on the PDP-1, but on pretty much every computer with a CRT display. By the mid-1960s, Spacewar could be found at the University of Michigan and the University of Illinois. It even made its way across the Atlantic Ocean to Cambridge. And all these iterations were slightly different. One version used a cloaking device instead of a hyperspace button, rendering the player's ship invisible for a short period of time. Others allowed up to 4 people to play at once, and one even included a first-person perspective. Spacewar proved so popular that the PDP-1's manufacturer, Digital Equipment Corporation, or DEC, began selling their computers with Spacewar pre-installed. By 1970, nearly every computer lab in the United States had a version of Spacewar. As with Higginbotham, Russell and his friends did not try to commercially develop their game. While computers were cheaper in 1962 than in 1958, they still weren't cheap, and no arcade or amusement center was going to shell out $100,000 just for a game of Spacewar. But in the town of Nashua, New Hampshire, just an hour's drive north of MIT, there was a man who was attempting to adapt video games into a commercial product. And what's more, he was attempting to do it on home television. Ralph Henry Baer was born in the Rhineland region of Germany on March 8, 1922. The son of Jewish parents, Baer and his family faced persecution under the rising tide of Nazism. The family left Germany in 1938, just 2 months before the Kristallnacht, or Night of Broken Glass, the terror act in which thousands of German Jews were murdered and forcibly taken to concentration camps. The family arrived in New York City, and Baer, then just 15 years old, got a job at a radio factory. He proved to be something of a prodigy when it came to electronics, and in 1943 he was drafted into the US Army, where he served as an intelligence officer. After the war, Baer attended the University of Chicago on the GI Bill, and became the first person in the world to earn a bachelor's degree in television engineering. After moving between a few companies, he settled into a job at defense contractor Sanders Associates in 1956, where he remained until his retirement. Sanders Associates specialized in military electronic systems, and Baer oversaw a team charged with developing new technology. Despite working for a defense contractor, Baer maintained an interest in television and sought ways to make them more than what they currently were. There are 40 million of them, Baer said in a 2014 interview with GameDeveloper.com, and all I can watch here is stupid channels, and if I don't like what I see, all I can do is turn the damn thing off. Thinking television had to have more potential than that, Baer came up with the idea of using it to play games. Television ownership saw a rapid increase in the United States throughout the post-war period. In 1950, only about 9% of American households owned a television. By 1965, it was over 90%. Baer saw this as a huge untapped market, and in 1966 he wrote a proposal for a television-based gaming device. At first, his bosses were skeptical. They were in the defense business after all, not the game business. But they felt Baer might be onto something, and so he was given a small team and $2,500 to build a prototype. After about a year of work, Baer had his prototype. The brown box, in all likelihood the very first video game console ever built. It was a bulky device, clad in wood panel veneer, hence the name brown box. It did not use integrated circuits and relied on the older method of physically wiring together each component. It was a crude device, but it worked. The graphics and gameplay were simple, even simpler than Tennis for Two or Spacewar. It could, at most, display a few movable rectangles at a time. There was no sound, no way to keep score, and all the games were two-player. But compared to a computer, it was cheap. So cheap that with sufficient tinkering, Baer was convinced it would make a viable commercial product. Sanders Associates would never make such a product themselves, but if Baer could convince his bosses of the invention's potential, he would be allowed to patent the brown box and then sell that patent to another company. All he needed was the go-ahead from his superiors. Baer and his team presented the brown box to the board of Sanders Associates in 1968. As Baer recalled, the presentation did not go well. "What the hell are you screwing around with?" was the general consensus. But a handful of executives saw the brown box's potential, and with trepidation, they gave Baer the green light to patent his device and find a third-party buyer. After approaching several television manufacturers, Baer finally struck a deal with Magnavox, and in October of 1971, they released the world's very first commercially available home video game console, the Magnavox Odyssey. Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, a young entrepreneur from Utah was about to change video games and the world forever.